Hey all, welcome back to the process where I talk about Elixir and OTP processes and deep dive into how they work. This is episode 4.1, which is all about GenServer.call. In previous episodes, we talked about task, which is an Elixir process that sequentially runs a function without any need to communicate or coordinate with other processes, except possibly at its conclusion. In the next few episodes, we're going to talk about GenServer, which is one of the oldest and most important features of OTP. This episode is about GenServer.call, or the basics of GenServer.call. We'll have a second episode about more advanced parts of GenServer.call. And the important thing to remember about GenServer.call is that it performs a synchronized call and response between two processes. The general gist of GenServer.call is that you pass it a target PID and the message, which could be anything. And this message is somehow put into the message queue of the receiving GenServer and handled by the receiving GenServer's handle callback. But let's see what's actually happening. So in order to dissect GenServer.call, first I'm going to start a plain process. And the code for that I have here. And all the process is going to do is going to wait for a message and print to screen whatever it receives in its queue. So that's this right here. Let's go ahead and copy and paste that. And the result of that, of course, is the PID. The next thing I'm going to do is to call this running PID with GenServer.call. And what you might find a little disconcerting is that in no way did we label this process itself as any sort of GenServer. And in other programming languages, you might expect that to cause problems because you might have to, say, inherit from some sort of GenServer object or traits. But in the case of Elixir and Erlang, it doesn't matter. A PID is just a PID, and all of the spinach around GenServer is built upon smaller pieces. And I'm going to show you that small piece. So here's what happened when we called GenServer.call. This process here received a message that had this magic GenCall atom, something that looks like a PID and a reference. And finally, the third part of this tuple was the actual message that I sent. Now, I wonder if you can guess which PID this would be. Well, let's take a look. So this PID is the PID of the process that sent the GenServer.call. So you should think of this piece as basically some sort of a return address. And so this is how you know where to respond. And this reference here is for demultiplexing. So in the case that multiple messages are flying around, you want to make sure that you're responding to the correct message. And because references are unique and represent a time and place, that's how you know that this is a particular, that the response is a response to my message. Finally, you'll note that we got this exit message. So what's going on here? Well, we never bothered to send a response back to the calling process, or our shell process. So this spawn just finished itself off and exited with the normal exit signal. And as a result, somehow this GenServer.call was able to detect that that process went away and relinquish control because it said, there's no possible way for me to be receiving this message. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to run the reverse operation. And if you were to call a GenServer, the GenServer would respond with some sort of message. And I want to understand what exactly the response looked like. OK, so in order to do that, I've created a mini module. And notice here that I didn't even bother doing use GenServer. But it kind of looks like a GenServer. It's got the expected init callback, and it also implements the handle call callback. So let's go ahead and start this GenServer. Normally, you might be used to starting a GenServer by calling startLink within the startLink function of the module itself. But of course, I'm going to show you that you don't have to do that. So let's go ahead and copy this code. So we're just going to call startLink and create a GenServer that's attached to the functions in this my GenServer module. And of course, we're going to get a PID. Now, we're going to have to package up our own gen call because I'm not going to use GenServer.call. And what this will do is it will serve to prove to you that there's nothing special about this message that's coming in, right? And it will be properly unpacked by this handle call function, and the reply will be my reply. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to make a reference using the makeRef function, and that will create a unique reference. Now I'm going to send PID a tuple that looks just like the tuple that we received. And then here we're going to put our return address, which is our self, and then the reference. And then we're going to send the payload, which in this case is just going to be my message. And here's what's the interesting thing. You can see that that was the package message that we sent. And let's flush to see what's in our own mailbox. And here you can see we got a response, which is basically the reference that we sent off with the reply that came back from the GenServer. One more thing to notice is that there's actually no requirement that the reply comes from the same process that received the initial GenServer call. So let's go ahead and show that. We can, instead of returning reply, we can do no reply. And what we can do then is to say spawn a new function. And then we're going to do process.sleep. Let's wait maybe 5 seconds. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call a special function called GenServer.reply. And then we're going to reply from, and then we're going to reply done. OK, so let's recompile this. And now when we call into handle call, the new code will be executed. So here I'm going to send another message, just like I did before. And then we're going to immediately flush and see that nothing is there. But if we wait a few seconds so that the 5 seconds has elapsed, what we're going to see is that we got reference that we created here as part of the message with the reply message done. So that's the basics of how a call from GenServers works. Now, one thing I didn't tell you is that I'm running an older version of Erlang, specifically Erlang 23, which makes some of this stuff look simpler. In particular, this from piece has only a reference as its sort of as its identifier to match up with what we sent before. In Erlang 24 and beyond, this is actually changed to another item called an alias, which I won't get into because it's beyond the scope of of this process series. But what we will talk about next is how do we handle all sorts of weird corner cases that could happen if this whole sending messages back and forth doesn't work. All right. Well, hope you enjoyed this little deep dive into GenServer calls, and I will see you in the next one.